The research ship New Horizon dropped through the thick clouds of Kepler 442c, like a metal bird seeking shelter. Captain Jake Morrison gripped his command chair as the vessel shook from atmospheric turbulence. Through the viewing window, he watched the jungle moon spread out below them in endless waves of green. "Looks peaceful enough," said Dr. Lisa Grant, the team's xenobiologist. She pressed her face against the glass, already excited about the discoveries waiting in that vast wilderness. Her equipment cases sat secured behind her, filled with instruments to study whatever life they might find. "Peaceful can be deceiving," replied Sam Rodriguez, the security chief. His weathered face showed the skepticism of a man who had seen too many missions go wrong. "Some of the most dangerous places I've been looked like paradise from orbit," the shuttle pilot Alex Turner called out from his seat. "Landing zone confirmed, Captain. Setting us down in that clearing near the river should give us good access to multiple biomes." Morrison nodded. This was supposed to be a simple research mission. Study the local wildlife, catalog the ecosystem, determine if the moon could support human colonization. 3 weeks on the surface, then home with their data. Nothing complicated. The shuttle touched down with a soft thud, kicking up clouds of alien dust. Through the settling debris, Morrison could see towering trees that stretched up like cathedral pillars. Vines hung between them like natural curtains, and strange bird-like creatures flitted through the canopy. "Atmosphere checks out," announced Kate Williams, their chief engineer. "Breathable air, normal pressure. Temperature is warm but comfortable. We're good to go outside." Ryan Phillips, their youngest team member and sample collection specialist, was already at the airlock. "Can we set up base camp first? I'm eager to start gathering specimens." "Slow down, rookie," Rodriguez said with a grin. "We secure the area first, then science happens." The team spent the next few hours establishing their camp. They set up their prefabricated shelters in a defensive circle, with the shuttle at the center. Solar panels were unfolded to charge their equipment. A water purification system was connected to the nearby stream. Everything went smoothly. Too smoothly, Morrison thought as he watched Rodriguez patrol the perimeter. The captain had learned to trust his instincts, and something felt off about this place. It was too quiet, too still. Dr. Grant was already at work, scanning the nearby vegetation with her instruments. "The biodiversity here is incredible," she called out. "I'm reading plant compounds that don't exist anywhere in known space. And the soil samples show signs of complex organic activity." Phillips jogged over with his collection kit. "I'm going to head toward those thick trees about a quarter-mile out. The readings show some interesting fungal activity there. Stay within comm range," Morrison warned, "and take a security beacon." "Will do, Captain." As the sun began to set, painting the alien sky in shades of purple and gold, the team gathered around their portable heater for dinner. The silence of the jungle was broken only by distant calls from unknown creatures. "It's beautiful here," Lisa said, stirring her ration pack. "Almost makes you forget we're the first humans to ever see this place." "That we know of," Rodriguez muttered. He kept glancing toward the tree line, his hand never far from his sidearm. Morrison was about to ask what was bothering the security chief when their comm system crackled to life. Phillips' voice came through, tight with excitement. "Base camp, this is Phillips. You need to see what I've found out here. There are structures in the trees. Not natural ones. Something built them." "Define something," Morrison replied, already standing. "I'm not sure. They look like platforms, maybe, or nests. They're big enough for large animals. Really large animals." Before Morrison could respond, Phillips' voice changed completely. The excitement vanished, replaced by fear. "Wait, something's moving. Something big, oh no. Oh no, no, no." The comm erupted with the sound of crashing vegetation and Phillips shouting. In the background, they could hear a low, rumbling growl that made Morrison's blood run cold. "Phillips, report." Rodriguez barked into his communicator while grabbing his rifle. "Running! It's chasing me!" "Thing's huge, like nothing I've ever seen." The sounds of pursuit grew louder through the comm. Heavy footsteps pounded through undergrowth. More growls joined the first, deeper and more threatening. "There's more than one," Phillips gasped. "They're hunting in a pack." Morrison was already moving toward the shuttle to prep the engines when Phillips burst from the tree line. The young man was running faster than seemed humanly possible, his equipment scattered and his jacket torn. Behind him, the vegetation exploded as something massive gave chase. What emerged from the jungle made Morrison's heart stop. The creature stood 8 feet tall on powerful legs, its body covered in dark scales that seemed to absorb light. Claws as long as knife blades gleamed in the fading sunlight. Its head was massive, filled with teeth designed for killing. But the most unsettling thing was its eyes. They held intelligence. This wasn't just a beast. This was a predator that could think. Rodriguez opened fire, his rifle cracking sharply in the still air. The creature dodged with impossible grace, moving faster than something that size should be able to. It reached Phillips just as the young man dove behind their equipment pile. Instead of finishing him off, the creature stopped. It studied Phillips for a long moment, then deliberately raked its claws across his shoulder. Not deep enough to kill, but deep enough to mark. Deep enough to send a message, then it backed away, never taking its eyes off the humans. More shapes moved in the tree line. Golden eyes reflected their camp lights. The pack was watching, evaluating. The creature that had marked Phillips was clearly the leader. Scars crisscrossed its hide, telling stories of countless battles. When it looked at Morrison, the captain felt like prey for the first time in his life. The alpha made a sound, half growl and half something that might have been communication. The other creatures melted back into the jungle as silently as they had appeared. But Morrison knew they hadn't gone far. "Medical kit," Dr. Grant called out, already tending to Phillips's wounds. "The cuts are clean but deep. He'll need stitches." As Grant worked on Phillips, Morrison pulled Rodriguez aside. "How bad is this?" "Bad," the security chief replied grimly. "That wasn't random predation. They were testing us, learning our capabilities. That alpha marked Phillips like it was claiming territory." Morrison looked toward the dark jungle where those golden eyes still watched from the shadows. "How long until we can lift off?" Kate Williams looked up from her diagnostic tablet. "The landing damaged our main engine coupling. I need at least 3 days to fabricate replacement parts." 3 days. Morrison felt the weight of those words settle on his shoulders like a lead blanket. 3 days to survive against intelligent predators who now knew exactly where to find them. In the darkness beyond their lights, something howled. It was answered by another call, then another. The pack was communicating, planning. The hunt had begun. The first night passed without sleep for anyone in the camp. Morrison organized watch shifts, but the creatures they now called Shadow Claws seemed to know exactly when and where each guard would be. Golden eyes appeared at the edge of their light, watching, studying, then vanishing when anyone tried to get a clear look. Dr. Grant spent the dark hours reviewing her scanner data. "Their movement patterns are too coordinated to be random," she told Morrison during the pre-dawn briefing. "Look at this thermal imaging. They circle our perimeter every 2 hours, always from a different direction. They're mapping our defenses." Rodriguez had set up motion sensors around their camp, but the creatures seemed to know exactly where each device was placed. They triggered the alarms just often enough to keep the humans on edge, but never actually attacked. "They're playing with us," Phillips said, wincing as he adjusted his bandaged shoulder. The claw marks were healing, but they served as a constant reminder of how close he had come to death. "That alpha could have killed me yesterday, but it chose not to." "Why?" "Maybe it wants us alive for something," Morrison replied, though he didn't like thinking about what that something might be. As the alien sun rose, painting the jungle in shades of amber and green, the immediate threat seemed to fade. The golden eyes disappeared with the darkness, but Morrison knew the Shadow Claws hadn't gone far. Williams worked frantically on the engine repairs while the rest of the team tried to fortify their position. They used equipment cases to build barriers and set up additional lighting around their perimeter. It felt like building sandcastles against a tsunami, but it was better than doing nothing. "I need to understand them better," Dr. Grant said, as she studied video footage from their security cameras. "Look at their body language, the way they communicate with each other. These aren't just smart animals. They have complex social behaviors." On the screen they could see the Shadow Claws moving through the jungle like ghosts. The alpha was always at the center of the group, directing the others with subtle gestures. When one of the smaller creatures moved too close to the human camp, the alpha's posture shifted slightly, and the subordinate immediately backed away. "Pack hunters," Rodriguez observed, "like wolves but bigger and smarter. Much smarter." Turner, who had been monitoring their communications equipment, looked up with bad news. "The electromagnetic interference is worse than we thought. Our long-range comm array is completely blocked. Even if we get the engines fixed, no one knows we're in trouble." The reality of their situation settled over the camp like a heavy blanket. They were alone on an alien world with intelligent predators who seemed to be playing a game only they understood. As the day progressed, the shadow claws became bolder. They no longer waited for darkness to show themselves. Morrison caught glimpses of dark shapes moving through the trees, always just at the edge of vision. When he turned to look directly, they were gone. Phillips volunteered for the afternoon watch, despite his injured shoulder. "I need to understand what happened yesterday," he told Dr. Grant. "That alpha looked at me like it was trying to communicate something." "Be careful," Grant warned. "Intelligence in predators can be more dangerous than simple hunger." Phillips positioned himself near the equipment pile where he had been marked, watching the tree line through binoculars. For hours, nothing happened. Then, just as the sun began to set, movement caught his eye. The alpha emerged from the jungle alone without its pack. It moved with deliberate slowness, stopping every few steps to study the human camp. Its massive head turned toward Phillips, and those golden eyes locked onto his. "Base camp, this is Phillips," he whispered into his comm. "The alpha is here. It's alone. Get back to the safe zone," Morrison ordered immediately. "Wait, it's not moving aggressively. It's just watching me." Phillips slowly stood up, keeping his hands visible and away from any weapons. The alpha tilted its head, a gesture that seemed almost curious. For several minutes, human and alien studied each other across the clearing. Then Phillips did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He slowly raised his hands, palms forward, in a universal gesture of peace. He had no idea if the creature would understand, but something in its intelligent eyes suggested it might. The alpha's posture changed subtly. Its claws retracted slightly, and its tail, which had been lashing aggressively, settled into a more neutral position. It made a low sound, not quite a growl that somehow seemed less threatening than before. "It's responding to non-threatening behavior," Dr. Grant breathed into the comm. "Phillips, try moving very slowly to your left." Phillips took a careful step sideways. The alpha's eyes tracked the movement, but it didn't advance. Instead, it seemed to mirror the motion, taking its own step in the same direction. "Incredible," Grant whispered. "It's mimicking non-aggressive body language. This is communication." The moment was broken when Rodriguez's motion sensors triggered an alarm. The alpha's head snapped toward the sound, and its aggressive posture returned instantly. It melted back into the jungle as other shadow claws appeared at the tree line. "False alarm," Rodriguez called out. "Just a scanner malfunction." But the damage was done. The creatures had vanished again, leaving Phillips alone in the gathering darkness. However, something had changed in that brief exchange. The alpha had shown restraint, even curiosity. It had responded to peaceful gestures with peaceful ones of its own. That night, the Shadow Claw's behavior shifted again. Instead of the constant probing attacks of the previous evening, they seemed content to observe from a distance. The golden eyes were still there, watching from the darkness, but the feeling of immediate threat had lessened. "They're learning about us," Dr. Grant said as she analyzed the day's recordings. "But we're learning about them too." That alpha showed advanced cognitive abilities. It understood that Phillips was trying to communicate. Morrison nodded, but his expression remained grim. "The question is, what do they want? And how long before they decide we're a threat that needs to be eliminated?" Williams looked up from her repair work. "2 more days," she announced. "I can have us flight ready in 2 more days if nothing else goes wrong. 2 more days of this deadly game of cat and mouse. 2 more days of trying to understand predators who might be more intelligent than the humans they were stalking." As the night deepened, Phillips found himself thinking about that moment of connection with the alpha. There had been something in those golden eyes, something that spoke of understanding beyond simple predatory instinct. But understanding didn't necessarily mean friendship. And intelligence in a predator could make it far more dangerous than any mindless beast. In the jungle beyond their lights, the Shadow Claws continued their patient watch. The alpha stood motionless among the trees, its scarred hide blending perfectly with the shadows. It had learned something important about these strange creatures who had invaded its territory they could be reasoned with. The question was whether that made them more valuable as allies or more dangerous as enemies. The alpha would need more information before making that decision, and it knew exactly how to get it. The second night brought unexpected quiet. The Shadow Claw's constant surveillance continued, but the probing attacks had stopped completely. Morrison found this change more unsettling than the previous night's harassment. At least when they were testing the defenses, he knew what they were thinking. This new behavior was impossible to read. Dr. Grant had barely slept, spending most of the night studying her recordings and scanner data. Their communication patterns are more complex than I initially thought, she explained to the team over breakfast. Listen to this. She played audio recordings from the previous evening. To Morrison, it sounded like random growls and low rumbles. But Grant's face was animated with excitement. These aren't just territorial calls. There are distinct patterns, variations in tone and rhythm. It's language, or at least a sophisticated communication system. They're sharing information about us. What kind of information? Rodriguez asked, not liking the implications. Our numbers, our weapons, our behavior patterns, everything they need to plan their next move. Phillips looked up from his ration pack, his bandaged shoulder a reminder of his close encounter. Maybe they're trying to decide what we are, whether we're a threat or just strange visitors. Either way, we can't assume their intentions are friendly, Morrison said. Williams, how are those repairs coming? The engineer wiped grease from her hands before answering. Better than expected. I found a way to bypass the damaged coupling. We might be ready to lift off by tomorrow evening instead of the day after. It was the first good news they'd had since landing. Morrison felt some of the tension leave his shoulders, but he knew they weren't safe yet. A lot could happen in the next 30 hours. That afternoon, Phillips volunteered for perimeter duty again. Despite Morrison's concerns, the young man seemed drawn to understand their watchers better. He positioned himself at the same spot where he'd had his encounter with the Alpha, hoping to learn more about their behavior. For several hours, nothing happened. Then Phillips heard something that made his blood run cold. From deep in the jungle came a sound he'd never heard before, but somehow recognized instantly. It was the cry of something young and in distress. The sound came again, weaker this time. Phillips grabbed his binoculars and scanned the tree line. The shadow claws were nowhere to be seen, which was strange. They had maintained constant surveillance for 2 days, but now the jungle appeared empty. Base camp, this is Phillips. I'm hearing distress calls from the jungle. Something's wrong out there. Stay put, Morrison ordered. It could be a trap. But the cries came again, and Phillips found himself moving toward the sound before he could stop himself. His training told him to stay in the safe zone, but his instincts as a researcher drew him forward. What if something was injured? What if he could help? The cries led him to a cave system he hadn't noticed before, hidden behind a curtain of hanging vines. The sounds were definitely coming from inside. Phillips activated his helmet light and pushed through the vegetation. What he found inside made him forget every safety protocol he'd ever learned. 3 juvenile shadow claws huddled together in the back of the cave. They were much smaller than their adult counterparts, barely the size of large dogs with oversized eyes and softer features. Their scales lacked the dark coloration of the adults, instead showing patterns of gray and silver. But it was clear these youngsters were in trouble. They appeared malnourished, their ribs visible beneath their scales. One of them had an obvious limp favoring its left rear leg. Another showed signs of dehydration, its eyes dull and unfocused. My God, Phillips whispered into his comm. I've found their young. 3 juveniles, and they're in bad shape. Get out of there immediately. Rodriguez's voice crackled through the speaker. Adult shadow claws are probably nearby. I don't think so, Phillips replied, studying the cave more carefully. This looks like they've been abandoned here. There are no adult scents, no signs of recent activity. These babies have been alone for days. Dr. Grant's voice cut through the static. That explains the adult behavior. They're not just protecting territory. They're searching for their missing young. Phillips approached the juveniles slowly, keeping his movements non-threatening. The healthy 2 backed away, but the injured one was too weak to move. It lay on its side, breathing heavily, clearly suffering from infection in its damaged leg. The electromagnetic interference, Phillips said suddenly, the pieces falling into place. It's not just affecting our equipment. What if it's disrupting their natural navigation abilities? What if the adults can't find these babies because of the interference? The injured juvenile looked up at Phillips with eyes that held the same intelligence as its adult counterparts, but also something else. Trust maybe, or simply desperation. It made a soft sound, not quite a whimper, that tugged at something deep in Phillips's chest. I'm bringing them back to camp, Phillips announced. Absolutely not. Morrison's voice cut through the comm. We don't know how the adults will react. Captain, that injured one is dying. Look at my video feed. Without help, it won't survive another day. Dr. Grant's voice was excited despite the danger. Phillips is right. If we can help their young, it might change everything. Show them we're not a threat. Or it might convince them we're stealing their children, Rodriguez countered. Phillips had already made his decision. He carefully approached the injured juvenile, speaking in soft, soothing tones. The creature was too weak to resist as he gently lifted it in his arms. Its body was surprisingly light, and he could feel its rapid heartbeat against his chest. The other two juveniles followed as Phillips carried their injured sibling toward the cave entrance. They stayed close but didn't try to stop him, seeming to understand that he was trying to help. As Phillips emerged from the cave with his precious cargo, he froze. The adult Shadow Claws had returned. The entire pack stood in the clearing between him and the base camp, with the Alpha at their center. But something was different about their posture. The aggressive tension that had characterized their previous encounters was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like anxiety. The Alpha's golden eyes were fixed on the juvenile in Phillips's arms, and its entire body language screamed desperation. "Phillips, don't move," Morrison's voice whispered through the comm. "We have you covered." But Phillips understood what he was seeing. These weren't predators preparing to attack. These were parents who had found their missing children. The Alpha took a step forward, its massive head lowered, its posture submissive rather than threatening. "They're not going to attack," Phillips said with sudden certainty. "They just want their babies back." The injured juvenile in his arms made a weak sound, and the Alpha's response was immediate. It called back with a sound so full of relief and anguish that Phillips felt tears spring to his eyes. This was a parent's cry, recognizing the voice of its child. Phillips looked into the Alpha's eyes and saw not a monster, but a desperate parent whose child was dying. The electromagnetic interference that had trapped the humans had also separated this family, leaving the adults unable to find their young. In that moment, Phillips made a decision that would change everything. Instead of retreating to the safety of the base camp, he took a step toward the Alpha. "I want to help," he said aloud, knowing the creature couldn't understand his words, but hoping it would understand his intent. "Let me help your child." The Alpha stood perfectly still as Phillips approached, every muscle tense but controlled. When Phillips was close enough to see the scars that crisscrossed the massive creature's hide, he carefully knelt and laid the injured juvenile on the ground between them. The Alpha looked from its injured child to Phillips, and something passed between human and alien that transcended language, understanding, trust, a shared desire to protect the vulnerable. The moment stretched into eternity as two species that should have been enemies found common ground in the most basic of instincts, the need to care for their young. The Alpha approached its injured child with movements so careful they seemed almost reverent. Its massive claws, which had seemed so threatening before, now handled the small creature with impossible gentleness. The juvenile made a weak sound of recognition, and the Alpha's response was a low rumble that could only be described as a parent's lullaby. Phillips remained kneeling between the Alpha and the base camp, acutely aware that he was in the most dangerous position of his life. One wrong move from either side could trigger a bloodbath. But as he watched the Alpha examine its injured young, he saw something that changed his entire understanding of these creatures. The Alpha was crying. Not tears as humans would recognize them, but a clear fluid that leaked from the corners of its golden eyes as it gently nuzzled its dying child. The sound it made was pure heartbreak, a parent's anguish translated across species lines. "Dr. Grant," Phillips whispered into his comm, "I need the medical kit. The injury is worse than I thought. Infection is spreading and the juvenile is severely dehydrated." "Phillips, get back here now," Morrison ordered. That's a direct command, but Dr. Grant's voice cut through the static. "Captain, this is our chance. If we can save their child, we might establish peaceful contact. This could be the most important first contact moment in human history." The Alpha seemed to understand that Phillips was communicating with others. It looked toward the base camp, then back at Phillips, its posture tense but not aggressive. It was waiting to see what the humans would do. Phillips made his choice. He slowly stood and walked backward toward the camp, keeping his eyes on the Alpha. The massive creature followed at a distance, staying close enough to protect its young but far enough to avoid triggering the human's defensive instincts. As Phillips reached the perimeter, Dr. Grant emerged with her medical kit. Rodriguez and Morrison flanked her, weapons ready but not aimed directly at the Alpha. "This is insane," Rodriguez muttered, but he didn't interfere as Grant knelt beside the injured juvenile. The Alpha watched every movement as Grant examined the small creature. When she produced a scanner to check its vital signs, the Alpha's posture tensed, but it didn't attack. It seemed to understand that the human was trying to help. "Severe infection in the leg wound," Grant reported. "Dehydration, malnutrition, and what looks like a fever. But the anatomy is close enough to Earth reptiles that I might be able to treat it." She looked up at the Alpha, whose golden eyes were fixed on her with desperate hope. "I'll need to clean the wound and give it antibiotics. It might be painful for the juvenile." As if understanding her words, the Alpha moved closer to its child. When Grant began cleaning the infected wound, the juvenile cried out in pain. The Alpha immediately positioned itself where the young one could see it, making soft, comforting sounds. The other two juveniles had followed Phillips to the camp and now huddled near their parent. The entire pack of adult Shadow Claws had moved closer, forming a protective circle around the medical scene, but they showed no aggression toward the humans. "This is remarkable," Turner whispered from his position behind the equipment barrier. "They're allowing us to treat their young. The trust this requires." Grant worked quickly but carefully, cleaning the wound and applying antibiotic gel from their veterinary supplies. The juvenile's breathing eased almost immediately as she administered fluids through a small IV line. "The other two are malnourished, but basically healthy," she reported after examining them. "They just need food and water." Phillips had been thinking about the electromagnetic interference problem. "The mineral deposits that are blocking our communications are probably disrupting their navigation too. They've been separated from their young for days, unable to find them. Which explains their aggressive behavior," Morrison said, understanding dawning on his face. "They weren't trying to drive us away from their territory. They were desperately searching for their children and saw us as either a threat or a potential source of information." Williams jogged over from the shuttle. "Captain, I've been monitoring the EM fields. The interference comes in waves tied to some kind of underground geological activity. If we can predict the pattern, we might be able to find windows when communication is possible." The Alpha had been listening to the humans talk, its head tilted in concentration. Suddenly it stood and moved to a flat area near the camp. Using one massive claw, it began drawing in the dirt. "Is it making a map?" Grant asked in amazement. The Alpha's drawing was crude but recognizable. It showed the human camp, the cave where the juveniles had been found, and several other locations marked with symbols. Phillips studied the markings. These other symbols, they could be other Shadow Claw groups, or maybe safe areas for their young. The Alpha looked at Phillips and made a sound that was clearly interrogative. It pointed to the human camp, then to the drawn map, then back to Phillips. "I think it's asking about our territory," Phillips said. "Whether we plan to stay or if we're just passing through." Morrison stepped forward slowly. The Alpha's attention focused on him with laser intensity, recognizing him as the leader of the human group. "We're leaving," Morrison said clearly, pointing to the shuttle and then to the sky. "We're going home." The Alpha followed his gestures, its intelligence evident in how quickly it grasped the meaning. Relief seemed to flow through its posture. The humans weren't invaders trying to claim territory. They were temporary visitors who would soon be gone. As the hours passed, an extraordinary scene unfolded. The human medical team worked to stabilize the injured juvenile, while the Shadow Claw pack maintained a protective but peaceful watch. The other young ones were given food and water, which they accepted gratefully. Dr. Grant discovered that the juveniles were naturally curious about the humans. When she wasn't actively treating the injured one, the healthy youngsters would approach her equipment with obvious fascination. She showed them simple tools and they examined each item with the intensity of young scientists. "Their neural development is remarkable," Grant told Morrison. "These juveniles show cognitive abilities equivalent to human children, maybe higher." As night fell, Williams announced that the shuttle repairs were nearly complete. "6 more hours and we can lift off," she reported. The Alpha seemed to understand that the human's departure was approaching. It gathered its pack and began preparing to leave, but not before doing something that amazed everyone present. One by one, each adult Shadow Claw approached Phillips. They didn't touch him, but each made a gesture that seemed unmistakably like a bow. The Alpha came last, standing directly in front of Phillips for a long moment. Then it did something unprecedented. It reached out with one massive claw and gently touched Phillips's shoulder, exactly where it had marked him during their first encounter. But this time there was no aggression in the gesture. It was acknowledgement, perhaps even gratitude. The Alpha looked directly into Phillips's eyes and made a sound that needed no translation. It was saying goodbye and thank you. As the Shadowclaw pack prepared to depart with their reunited young, the injured juvenile had recovered enough to walk with assistance. Dr. Grant had done everything she could, and the infection was clearly responding to treatment. But as the pack began to move toward the jungle, something unexpected happened. The healthy juveniles hung back, reluctant to leave the human camp. They looked between their parents and the humans with obvious confusion. The Alpha noticed their hesitation and made a decision that would define this first contact forever. Instead of forcing the young ones to choose, it settled down at the edge of the camp, clearly indicating that the pack would stay nearby until the humans departed. It was a gesture of trust so profound that Morrison felt humbled by it. These creatures, who could have easily destroyed the human expedition, had chosen to offer protection instead of threat. As the alien night deepened, two species that should have been enemies shared the same space in peaceful coexistence. The juveniles played at the edge of both groups, bridge builders between two different kinds of intelligence. In the morning, the humans would leave this world behind. But the memory of this moment would stay with them forever, proof that understanding could exist even between the most unlikely companions. Dawn came slowly to Kepler 442c, painting the jungle in shades of gold and emerald. Phillips woke to find the injured juvenile sleeping peacefully beside his shelter, its breathing steady and strong. The antibiotics had worked better than Dr. Grant had dared hope, and the small creature's fever had broken during the night. The Alpha sat nearby, never having moved from its protective position. When Phillips emerged from his shelter, those golden eyes tracked his every movement, but the expression in them had changed completely from their first encounter. Where once there had been suspicion and threat, now there was something that looked remarkably like respect. "Shuttles ready for departure," Williams announced as she completed her final systems check. "All repairs completed and tested. We can lift off whenever you give the word, Captain." Morrison nodded, but his attention was focused on the extraordinary scene before him. The human team and the Shadowclaw pack had spent the night in peaceful coexistence, two species learning to trust each other against all odds. Dr. Grant was conducting final scans of the juveniles, documenting their recovery for her research. "The injured one is stable," she reported. "The infection is clearing and mobility is returning to the damaged leg. In a few days it should be fully healed." The Alpha seemed to understand that the humans were preparing to leave. It rose from its resting position and began gathering its pack, but the movements were unhurried, almost reluctant. The juveniles, particularly the two healthy ones, showed obvious distress at the prospect of separation from their new human friends. Phillips found himself equally reluctant to say goodbye. Over the past 3 days, he had gone from fearing these creatures to respecting them, and finally to something approaching affection. The injured juvenile had slept against his shelter like a loyal pet, trusting him completely. "Captain," Dr. Grant said quietly, "I'd like to propose something. This world should be designated as a protected zone. No colonization, no resource extraction. These creatures have intelligence and social complexity that deserves our respect and protection." Morrison was already nodding. "Agreed. I'll make that recommendation to the Colonial Council. This will be a restricted world, open only to scientific study and peaceful contact." As the team prepared to board their shuttle, the Alpha did something unexpected. It approached Dr. Grant directly, moving with careful deliberation. When it reached her, it gently nudged her medical kit with its snout, then looked at her meaningfully. "I think it wants me to leave medical supplies," Grant said with wonder. "It understands that the juvenile might need continued treatment." Grant opened her kit and selected basic medical supplies, antibiotics, and wound dressing materials. She laid them out carefully and demonstrated their use to the Alpha, pointing to the injured juvenile and miming the application of medicine. The Alpha watched intently, its intelligence evident in how quickly it grasped the instructions. When Grant finished her demonstration, the massive creature made a sound that was unmistakably grateful. Phillips knelt beside the injured juvenile one last time. The small creature looked up at him with bright, alert eyes, completely free of the pain and fever that had nearly killed it. It made a soft chirping sound and gently touched Phillips's hand with its snout. "Take care of yourself, little one," Phillips whispered, not caring that the words meant nothing to an alien creature. The emotion behind them was universal. As the humans prepared to board their shuttle, the entire Shadowclaw pack gathered to see them off. It was a formal farewell, with each adult approaching the humans in turn. They didn't touch, but the gesture of respect was clear. The Alpha came last, approaching Captain Morrison with dignified bearing. The two leaders faced each other, human and alien, each recognizing the other's authority and wisdom. Morrison saluted, a crisp military gesture that somehow seemed appropriate for the occasion. The Alpha responded by lowering its massive head in acknowledgement, a bow between equals. As the shuttle's engines began their startup sequence, Phillips looked out the window to see the Shadowclaw pack standing at the edge of the clearing. The juveniles had moved to the front of the group, watching the strange metal bird that would carry their new friends away. "Beginning ascent," Turner announced from the pilot's seat. The shuttle lifted smoothly, rising above the jungle canopy. Phillips kept his eyes on the window as the camp grew smaller below them. The Shadowclaws remained at the edge of the clearing, watching their departure. Even from increasing altitude, he could see the Alpha's scarred hide and the bright spots of color that marked the juveniles. "They saved us," Phillips said quietly. "When they could have killed us, they chose to trust us instead." "We saved each other," Dr. Grant corrected. "That's what happens when intelligence meets intelligence with open minds instead of closed fists." As they broke through the atmosphere and the jungle moon fell away below them, Morrison was already composing his report in his mind. This first contact would change everything about how humanity approached alien species. The Shadowclaws had taught them that intelligence could take forms they never expected, and that understanding was possible even with the most unlikely neighbors. Turner set course for home, but Phillips found himself looking back at the green world they were leaving behind. Somewhere in that vast jungle, a pack of intelligent creatures was returning to their normal lives, but they were changed by the encounter just as the humans were. The injured juvenile would grow up with scars from human medical instruments, visible reminders of the day their species learned that strangers could be friends. The other juveniles would remember the alien visitors who brought their sibling back from the edge of death, and the Alpha would remember the moment when it chose trust over violence, changing the course of history for two species with a single decision. "Dr. Grant," Morrison said as the green world disappeared behind them, "I want you to begin planning a follow-up mission. Peaceful contact protocols, cultural exchange possibilities, long-term scientific cooperation." Grant's face lit up with excitement. "You want to go back?" "Eventually, when we're better prepared for meaningful contact. The Shadowclaws have shown us what's possible when different forms of intelligence meet with respect instead of fear." Phillips smiled as he thought about that future mission. Perhaps someday he would return to Kepler 442c and see those juveniles as adults, leading packs of their own. Perhaps they would remember the strange creatures who had helped them when they were small and vulnerable. The universe suddenly seemed like a much more welcoming place, full of unexpected possibilities for friendship and understanding. The Alpha had been ready to strike, had possessed the power to destroy the human expedition completely. Instead, it had seen a human holding its young with gentle care, and everything changed. That moment of recognition, of one parent acknowledging another's protective instinct, had bridged the gap between species that evolution had never intended to meet. It proved that some truths were universal, transcending the boundaries of biology and culture. Love, protection, the drive to care for the vulnerable, these were not uniquely human traits. They existed wherever intelligence flowered, waiting for the right moment to build connections across the vast loneliness of space. As the New Horizon jumped to hyperspace, carrying the crew home with their remarkable story, Phillips made himself a promise. He would return to Kepler 442c someday, not as a stranger afraid of alien predators, but as a friend coming home to visit family. The Alpha would be waiting, he was certain of that. And maybe, just maybe, it would remember the day when two species learned that the universe was big enough for more than one kind of intelligence, and gentle enough for them to coexist in peace. In the end, the most dangerous predator in the galaxy had become humanity's teacher, showing them that true strength lay not in the ability to destroy, but in the wisdom to choose understanding over fear. The hunt was over. The real journey was just beginning.